Hi everybody, TJ Mack of Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. The 1950s were a fascinating time in American history. We were still a relatively young nation whose victory in World War II helped us to grow up quickly into a superpower. We boasted the world's most powerful military, an economy that thrived on a growing middle class, and a culture that was marked by a unique blend of prosperity, optimism, and transformative social change. The 50s, of course, are remembered for its iconic fashion, music, and pop culture. It was the age of coonskin caps, cat-eye glasses, Howdy Doody, and Mr. Potato Head. In the world of sports, baseball is arguably entering its golden age, with its epicenter firmly entrenched in the city of New York, where the game was considered a civil religion. There, your identity was based on whether you chose to worship your heroes at the Polo Grounds, Ebbets Field, or Yankee Stadium. At the start of the 1950s, few would have thought a niche sport that was viewed by many as a violent and primitive game would by the end of the decade rival baseball for the nation's most popular sport. The majority of teams did not even have their own stadiums. They were usually guests in baseball stadiums, and that lasted far after football became popular as well. The Giants, for example, played in the Polo Grounds. The New York Yanks, who lasted only from 1950 to 1951, called Yankee Stadium their home. And football's Cardinals could be seen playing on Sundays in Chicago at Comiskey Park. Now today, I want to share with you a magazine that I've been looking to add to my collection for a little while now. This is the 1950 Sports Review Pro Football Edition. There were a few copies available of this magazine on eBay, but I wanted to get one that was in really nice condition. I eventually came across this copy that looks like it was barely touched. It's really hard to believe that it survived intact, given it's as large as Life magazine. I first discovered this magazine when I picked up the 1948 first card of Hall of Famer George McAfee. This is a striking image of the man known as Gorgeous George, with his arms stretched out and his left leg high in the air as if he just launched a booming punt. You have the bold, vibrant yellow background that matches his number and stripes on his uniform. Here's the back of the card where you can see his nickname right underneath his name, George McAfee. There are rarer copies of this card that feature his nickname on the front as well. What I was looking for when I purchased this card was a very vibrant example, which is important when you're looking for these leaf issues, especially the 48 leaves. They tend to be a little brighter than the 49. And my friend Chris at Stories and Cardboard told me about that, and he's exactly right. So I tend to find ones that have really nice color, which is the most important characteristic for me. Now you can see here on the cover of this magazine is George McAfee, and you can see the number 5 that matches his card as well. But also there were some liberties taken by the artist with the yellow that is shown here on the uniform. The Bears never wore yellow in their uniforms, but this is a form of pop art, in my view, these 48 and 49 leaf issues, and the artist, like I said, took some liberties with this. McAfee, who played his college football with Duke, was the second overall pick of the Bears in 1940, and he was a dynamic player. While his stats will not pop out at you, he was a versatile athlete as a running back, a pass catcher, a defensive back, and a punt and kick returner. George was also nicknamed One Play McAfee because he was a threat to take the ball the distance every time it was in his hands. It didn't matter if it was on offense, defense, or special teams. Now, he only played 8 seasons from 1940 to 1950, but lost 1942 through 1944 to the war. This is a very special player, and it's the fourth Leaf football card that I've added to my collection. One of the most interesting things I discovered when I saw this magazine cover is that the Rams wore yellow and red uniforms for only one season in 1949. Now, as far as I know, there's no cards depicting them in those colors. The Ram on the cover of this magazine is Fred Guiry. His claim to fame is that he was responsible for painting the Ram horns on the helmet in 1948. And this is the first ever logo that was used on a football helmet. It's still the same logo design that the team uses to this day. Guiry is also said to be the first player to wear a face mask. He's credited with developing the first helmet with a full face mask after he broke his nose 3 times during the 1946 season. He played the entire 1947 season with the face mask, which was made by Fred when he applied a clay mold to his face. Once the mask dried, he had a few of the machinists that he knew run it through a power stamping machine, and then he covered it with a sheet of aluminum. The manufactured piece of aluminum covered his nose, his forehead, and rested on his cheekbones to bear the brunt of the blows. Fred then took the mask to his grandfather, who covered it in leather. In order for Fred to get the helmet on, it was cut up the back and the laces were weaved into it. While the mask did protect Fred's face, it obscured his vision on pass plays to the sides. He could only see the ball with one eye. He returned to using the traditional helmet the next season. Now, he does have one football card in the 1948 Bowman set, and it's a short print. I would love to add it one day, given what a historical player he was. Besides the captivating cover, this magazine provides a glimpse into football history. Much of football's popularity started in the late 50s with Johnny Unitas and skyrocketed in the 60s when the Super Bowl era began. But it was 1950, which was a pivotal season in NFL history, that got things started. As you can see here on page 2 of this magazine, there's a cartoon illustration by Bob Hilmer showing the war between the All-America Football Conference, better known as the AAFC, and the NFL. Now, the AAFC was an NFL rival that existed from 1946 to 1949. When this magazine came out in 1950, the leagues merged, and the Cleveland Browns, Baltimore Colts, and San Francisco 49ers were added to the NFL from the AAFC. This illustration talked about potential rivalries to include the Browns and the Eagles, who were both champions of their respective leagues in 1949. They met in Week 1 of the 1950 NFL season, and the NFL thought the Browns could not compete with the Eagles. Billed as the World Series of Pro Football, the Browns shocked the Eagles by dominating them 35-10 as quarterback Otto Graham threw 3 touchdowns and ran in another. This magazine is filled with beautiful black and white photography. Here's an early version of a face mask being worn by one of the good running backs of the day, Chicago Cardinals, Elmer Angsman. I enjoyed this article on Steve Van Buren, who was arguably the most popular player of his time. He had many nicknames to include Supersonic Steve, Blockbuster, and as you can see here, Wham Bam. Van Buren was a big and punishing runner at 6'1" and over 200 pounds. A good-sized player in those days. In just 8 seasons from 1944 to 1951, he won 4 rushing titles and led the league in touchdowns 4 times. He was also a 5-time first-team All-Pro. What I love about this article is the contemporary view of him by his coach, Greasy Neal. Neal, who saw Red Grange play and was also a teammate of the great Jim Thorpe, said that Van Buren was better than Grange and at least the equal of Thorpe. Like Thorpe, he played even bigger than he was and loved plowing through linebackers. Now here's two photos that I'm going to give you a close-up of right here. The top one shows Van Buren's uniform just covered in mud as he carries the ball. And then down below, you have him seemingly walking forward with two players draped on him. This magazine brings to life what this 1950 Bowman card represents. And that's just what I love about going back to the history. A large picture on the left here is Van Buren's teammate and fellow Hall of Famer, wide receiver Pete Pihos, who's carrying two Washington Redskins on his back. The card shown next to him is the 1951 Bowman. On the top corner, you have the great 49ers quarterback, the left-handed Frankie Albert, wearing number 63 as the referee tries to move out of his way. Now, Frankie was the first quarterback to run the T formation in college. He had a relatively short playing career, only 7 seasons, but led the AAFC in touchdowns in 1948 and 1949. Here's his 1951 Bowman card. Check out this photo of a determined-looking Cloyce Box. He was a wide receiver for the Lions, who finished second in the league in 1950 with 1,016 receiving yards. He later owned the ranch that was shown in the first season of the late 70s hit show Dallas. Box only played 5 seasons, but was a very impactful player for such a short time. In the centerfold of the magazine, you have an illustration, again from Bob Hilmer, showing the 1949 all-professional team. And some of these players I do have within my collection, and there's others that I want to add. Just as I learn more about these players and just how great they were, I'm just excited to collect them and just make them part of my collection to display for many years to come. One of the things that I noticed here in the upper corner, it talked about the different positions, and it just said backs, and under backs they include both the running backs and the quarterbacks. In this photo, we have Hall of Fame wide receiver Bullet Bill Dudley, and I have his 51 Bowman card down below, and you can see him here weaving his way through the Chicago Cardinals defense. The magazine also includes team photos of the 1949 All-America Football Conference champions, the Cleveland Browns. As I'll show in a moment here, right below is the 1949 NFL champion Philadelphia Eagles. Imagine being a kid or even an adult back then. This is your glimpse into these players that you heard on the radio each week and didn't necessarily get to see, as TV contracts were not quite in place yet where you would regularly see football on TV. And as the decade progressed and more football got on television, that's when the popularity really soared. And here is a photo of the NFL champion Eagles. Now, the last part I want to quickly show is just all the statistical information that's captured within this magazine. And it must have been so interesting, again, to a young fan or adult reading this, just to get an idea of the numbers that were being put up by each player within the league at that time. And it showed the standings and just different information, and it went really in depth statistically in just the number of players that it listed for each category. And of course, football statistics are not as in depth, especially back then, as baseball statistics were. I took some extra time with this magazine because I wanted to capture the photos, as I plan to seal it up now that I've gone through it and read the articles I was interested in. The condition is just so nice that it needs to be protected to ensure that it lasts for generations to come. I hope you enjoyed this look back at 1950, and everybody have a great weekend.